This is episode 83, Crossing Canyons with Dr. Drew Sams. Welcome to Alive by Design. My name is Blake Mallon, and we're here to bring you inspiring people, principles, and practices to help you wake up, move toward your meant to, and feel fully alive. Open your mind and let's dive in. Hey guys, before you listen to the podcast, I just wanted to say I really appreciate you being here. If you want to catch these episodes happening live, where you often can ask real-time questions or maybe even get featured on the show, make sure we're connected on Instagram at Blake Mallon and on my Facebook page, facebook.com/BlakeMallon.page, as I'd love to see you there. Love you guys. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay sane, and enjoy the episode. And welcome back to the podcast here, Alive by Design. So excited about today's special guest. We get a chance to have a candid conversation with Dr. Drew Sams. And I know this is going to have a tremendous amount of value for so many of you tuned in here today. Now, for those of you guys that maybe don't recognize the name, most people know Drew as the senior pastor and head of staff here at Bel Air Presbyterian Church, an amazing campus right here in Los Angeles, one of the just most amazing, epic views, awesome energy, and just a hyper engaged, thriving congregation and community. But what I love, and you're going to learn about in today's conversation, is Drew is so much more than just his important role on campus. He's an avid surfer, which I personally love. He is an ultra runner. We're going to talk about just an insane adventure that he is just coming off of. He's a devoted family man. He's a passionate environmentalist. And when you hear him speak, you just get a sense that he's deeply interested about such important topics today, like social justice, nutrition, wellness. And, obviously he is a progressive doctor of divinity with just a refreshing perspective on how faith applies practically in just the crazy time we are in today. And you guys, his message is inspiring audiences all throughout, not only here in Los Angeles, but all across the world. A truly inspiring individual, awesome, outrageous energy. So excited to share a candid conversation with all of you today. And that is Dr. Drew Sams. Pastor Drew, how you doing, brother?
Man, Blake, so good to see you. Great to be with you. And everybody joining in, thank you for the time. I've been looking forward to this.
I'm so excited about today's conversation. I know right when we logged in, you're having a variety of a day, you were saying. We're kind of in the middle of a whole bunch of different things today.
Yeah, I mean, like everybody, right? We go through our days and it's usually not just like a singular task that we do all day long. We're not most likely all watchmakers that just do one thing. We've got a task switch and, that brings different parts of our skill set, strengths, weaknesses. And I love just being present in this moment in between what I came from, what I'm going to, kind of like everybody else's day, right?
I love it. Well, I'm honestly grateful for the time. I know your time is incredibly busy, obviously an insanely important role there at Bel Air and everything you have going on your plate. So I'm grateful for it. Kind of funny story. So obviously, my brother-in-law, Josh, right, and his wife, my sister-in-law, Savannah, I know were very engaged there at Bel Air when they lived here. Recently, obviously moved to Michigan, and obviously Savannah was a deacon and part of the worship team. And they came out here and stayed at my house for Easter. So our whole family was sitting in the seats for your message on Easter Sunday. And I don't know if you even remember this, but you had a little part. It wasn't like the main part of your message, but you opened it and you talked about your insane run. I wouldn't even call it a run. You just came off of in the Grand Canyon. And I was like, we did what? And I was a couple of days after Easter, just sitting at the dinner table with Josh and Savannah. I'm like Drew did what? And Savannah's like, you should just reach out to him and have him on your podcast. And I'm like, yeah. And I reached out on Instagram. You said yes. And here we are. I'm just so thankful for you taking the time.
Well, I'm so glad I'm on the other side of what you're referencing, which is in October of 2020, right in the middle of the pandemic. Me, 6 of my friends, one of those friends is actually my brother-in-law. He and I, as friends, married sisters like a decade and a half ago. So we're super close. and we did a double crossing of the Grand Canyon. And the Grand Canyon, a double crossing, 48 miles, 10,000 feet of elevation, descent and gain. It's running and hiking the way we did it. Emphasis on the hiking. Took us 17 hours, 4 hours longer than we planned. But, I came out of that canyon a different man. And it has absolutely transformed kind of how I view the world, but also how I view, to say it this way, the canyons that we have in our life. Like we crossed that physical canyon, but you could also say that there's also emotional canyons in our life. There's a vast chasm between maybe someone who's listening today and the completion of a project, or taking a company public. Like that's a big distance, right? So like, how do we even go about showing up and ultimately crossing that canyon? And I think I learned a lot in that physical experience that I've now brought back into my life to apply to all the different canyons that we might find in our lives.
I love the analogy. I love the message. And I just feel so aligned with a lot of what you stand for. And I definitely want to get into exactly what you're saying. But I'm not going to let you off the hook on nonchalantly saying, oh, we just did like a double Grand Canyon crossing, like hiking. 17 hours is insane. You said 48 miles. So yes. that's like almost 2 marathons in going up and down the Grand Canyon, 10,000 feet, 17 hours. That's a hustling pace. I mean, my first question, which I know that probably the average person, it's like first question someone's going to ask you is why?
Yes. Well, I think John Muir answered that question with, because the mountains are calling. And, I find I can break away from the noise in my life when I'm out in creation, out on the trail, in the ocean surfing, on a bike ride, whatever it might be. I know everybody's kind of got their thing. They know like, this is where I can recenter myself. This is where I can connect with the source of what is true, in my life. And for me, that's always been outside, always been out in nature. And so the why was partly because my brother-in-law and I got this idea in our head the year prior, and then we invited friends, and then it became this like thing of, oh, we're actually doing this thing. And I had never run that. I'd run a 31-mile race prior to that, and a 33-mile race even earlier than that, which is crazy far to begin with. But the 48 miles and the up and down 10,000 feet, that was, for me, next level.
So that was the furthest you've ever physically run any distance?
Oh, yeah.
Let alone up and down the Grand Canyon.
Yes. And what was so fascinating is that, so the guys that I was with, one of them had run a 100-mile race. One of them was training for a 200-mile race. And so like everything in life is relative, right? So for somebody, a 5K, a little over a 3-mile run could be the equivalent of the Grand Canyon. And somebody's marathon could be, just getting up outside and, walking for a minute. We've all got different things in our life that are like bigger than ourselves. And for me, it wasn't about the specific distance. It was, this is further than I've ever been in my life. I'm going to have to step into the unknown. I'm going to have to cross over a threshold that I have no idea what's on the other side. How am I going to do this, right? And, I think so many people, I understand this in physical races, want to get to the finish line, but other people realize it's a huge step just to get to the start. And a lot of people don't know this about races, like in marathons, there's a DNF status. So if you do not finish, like that's that's what's recorded, like no time, it's just DNF. Rough, right? Sometimes good reasons, you're nursing an injury, you don't want to push yourself, right? There's another status that's called DNS, did not start.
Wow.
And I think sometimes it's harder to get to the starting line than it is to make it to the finish line, regardless of what that is, whether that's to pick up the phone, to reconcile with somebody, or it's to finally, submit that application, or it's to take the first step towards, whatever it might be that somebody dreams. There's a lot of obstacles even before you get to the start. And that was true for us. I mean, it was in the middle of COVID and they shut down the Grand Canyon when we originally were going to do it back in May of 2020. And so there was all these reasons why we could have just said, like, you know what? Okay, we just found out they turned off half the water spigots in the Grand Canyon. Maybe we shouldn't just do this. Like, there was so many reasons why we shouldn't have shown up to the first place, to start. But there was this collective sense of like, no, we've set this goal. We want to make this happen. We had each other to hold each other accountable, to talk each other out of the fear of, whatever it might be. And we did it. And all 7 of us not only started, we got to the other side and we came back and finished.
I love that. You're literally giving me chills just speaking. DNF I'd heard of. DNS I hadn't. And that's so true for so many people, that we let our own fear of what may happen or what may not happen or what may not hit a certain goal or expectation, and all the what ifs keep us from even taking that first step. And there's no shame in the do not finish if you gave it the start, right? But so many of us never take that first step, let alone something, like an achievement like you did. A year worth of preparation. I'm just curious. I've never done anything that far. I've done 2 marathons in my life. And, the LA one right before COVID, actually last year. And then the Catalina, which has a little bit of elevation, nowhere near the Grand Canyon, but that was my first one. And I remember there was a very distinct moment when I was going up and down the trails in Catalina. I was like around literally mile 17, where I had the first, negative thought hit my head, where I'm like, oh, I may not finish this. Like it was the first time I'd ever had like self-doubt. I was hurting. I was gassed. Like my legs were starting to hurt. And I was like, I'm only on mile 17. And it was the first time in my whole training, where I'm like, I may not finish this. And it became like a mental game. I'm curious in your adventure here, because it's such an extreme, like, was there a moment in there where it was like, oh my God, right, we may not get out of this? Or, what were some of the moments that were the toughest in those 48 miles?
Oh, each of us, each of the 7 guys, we had our own moment that was the moment beyond our comfort zone. And my brother-in-law, he lives in Texas. You're training through the summer. For those that are familiar with the heat of northern Texas, like, you don't want to run in Texas, and there's no elevation. So how do you live in flat central, Texas? How do you train? So he had a treadmill that you could adjust the incline and decline up to 15, 20 degrees. So he does all of his training on the treadmill, a little bit on the road. So within about 5 minutes in the dark, we start at 3 a.m. It's like 35 degrees. All of us who trained in the mountains were feeling comfortable. We had just started, right? Immediately he's complaining. He's like, this ground is so rocky. We're like,
it's not a cushy treadmill surface.
you train on a treadmill, right? So for him, it was so fascinating. It was never about the distance.
Mm-hmm.
The whole time he had run further than that in his life. It was the terrain, it was the surface. It was the variation. There was another guy who lives out in the Palm Springs area, super rocky trails. Everything he trained on was the opposite of a treadmill. He was so comfortable with that. And it wasn't for him until mile 46. Like, you're 2 miles from the end. He was like laughing. He was filming on his GoPro. Like, he was like this mountain goat, right? And he just hit this wall at mile 46. And he was honestly one of the strongest runners of the group. He's the guy that had done 100-mile races. And he just hit the wall. And he literally had to have another guy, part of our group, arm around his shoulder, help getting him up. For me, it was when it was the heat of the day, afternoon. It was literally the moment, and it was such a mental thing, when I crossed over the threshold of the furthest I'd ever run before, 33 miles. Up until that moment, I knew what to expect. I had some like setbacks, but I knew what that was like. And there was just something about it. Mentally, I got past that, and the wheels started falling off the wagon. I stopped paying attention to my water intake. I stopped paying attention to my caloric intake. Things started to get out of balance. It was 95 degrees at that point. I mean, think about that swing, like mid 30s in the morning to mid 90s in the afternoon.
And that can be physically dangerous, right? I mean,
totally. Yeah. And this was the end of October. So we're like trying to like thread the needle of a window of weather. The following Monday, it snowed at the base of the Grand Canyon all the way down the Colorado River.
Wow.
Just like 4 days later. And so for me, that was the threshold that I was completely beyond my comfort zone. And we all had it for different reasons. And I really believe it was the community. It was the camaraderie. It was that mutual encouragement that each got each other through the different moments, whether that was in the first 5 minutes, halfway through, or at the tail end.
Do you think if you were there by yourself, you would have made it?
I might still be in the canyon. And not even to be like hyperbolic in it. There was a moment after that moment, 2 hours later, probably, where all the micro decisions that I had made, not having enough water, not having the calories, not making those little minor decisions, it began to snowball to the point that I began to hallucinate.
Oh, wow.
And this was at the beginning of the climb out of the canyon. We've already gone from the South Rim up to the North Rim, down the North Rim. Now we're coming out of the South Rim. It's starting to get dark. And I start to hallucinate, and I start to get paranoid. And I keep looking over my shoulder, and I'm being followed. And I'm looking over I'm being followed for like 15 minutes. And I'm just like, I can't believe this. Like, how is this happening? And it was the North Rim of the Grand Canyon, miles away, that I was convinced was following me. And I started to like wander off a path. And then that's when a buddy of mine, Matt, like yells my name, and I turn around to him, and he said, "Drew, the look on your face, it was like you were looking through me." I got so scared. And that's when another buddy of ours, Anthony, he's the one that was training for the 200-mile race. Like, he knew what was happening, ran over to me, like full on, like, we have to get water. I mean, he was yelling at me, right? Every 4-letter word to like shake me out of it. Like, we got to get water in you. We've got to you get those electrolytes, put them in. I think I'd still be in there because I couldn't have made those decisions for myself. And I was beginning to wander off the trail. And it's remarkable when you look back, like, you hear these stories of tragedy, and you can see when you get to that moment how quickly that can happen. These little minor decisions or lapse of judgment snowball, and then you can be, so far from where you want to be or need to be in that moment. And that's where the community really helped.
Yeah. And obviously it's so true and important for you in that moment, in that situation, to have the community, the people to lean on, the expertise. But like you said, I mean, that applies to so much of what we all kind of face in the canyons we all try to cross in life. I'm curious, because obviously there's a huge part of what you did that is physical, right? I mean, that's a huge, like, monumental physical effort. How much of it, though, would you say was mental? Would you say that the physical part was more exhausting or more difficult? Or would you say the mental part was more difficult, right? When it comes to just the completion, what ultimately got you out of that canyon?
I'd say it was much more mental in the training, in all the preparation, and then actually doing the work. So the physical, you can just, you've got a base, you've got the miles, there's a whole training program. You add a certain amount of miles. You don't want to overdo it. Right. And then there's a whole training cycle. And so the body adapts, and it's remarkable what the body can do. But it was the mind that was so difficult to remind me, yes, I have to wake up at 4 a.m. tomorrow to get that 20-mile training run in. Yes, I have to say no, to the alcohol for this season, because I know that that's going to help my body, get ready for it. I've got to say yes to this and no to this. And like the mental fortitude was remarkable, how much seemingly in the training was what I needed to refine. And that's where I would have the greatest setbacks. It was the mental setbacks that would then have ripple effects through the physical, the nutritional, whatever it might be. But then, of course, when you're in the canyon, man, it is all mental. It is all mind over matter. And that's where what was interesting, when I started to hallucinate, I thought, oh, like this is the moment. Like this is the moment where like it's all mental. Like I feel like I'm out of my body. Oh, good. Like I know what's going to happen. But then it got past it and I was just gone. And I needed somebody else's mind to help my mind and my body to get through it.
I mean, it sounds like such an amazing, I say amazing now. I'm sure in the moment it was like the most painful, toughest thing you've ever done in your life, but just such an amazing experience being on the other side. I'm curious, did you have any sort of, epiphanies, lessons, things you were surprised to learn about yourself or what you got out of, this experience?
Yeah. Having experienced it, I could look at that physical crossing and say there was 7 distinct stages of the whole thing. That's been the big transformation. That's been the big takeaway, that have almost become like 7 principles or 7 practices that I can literally employ in my life to cross the canyons that I need to cross. And they don't have to be geographical or physical. It could be, a distance between me and my dad, right? Relationally, emotionally. Okay, that's a canyon. Like, how do I? And so literally I've taken these 7 steps that I took in the Grand Canyon and I'm applying it to all these other canyons. And so we've already talked about the first one. You've got to be willing to show up to the start. And
okay.
Think about all the things that could apply to, like any project, any distance between you and someone else, to forgive, to ask for forgiveness, to learn a new skill, to make the decision to leave a company, to perhaps move to a different area, to ask somebody out. Like, it's not going to happen unless you're willing to show up to the start. And I wonder how many canyons collectively among all the people who are listening right now to your podcast, because I've got a long list of canyons that I never showed up to cross in my life. Like I look back on them like, oh, why did I not do that or show up to that? Many, many canyons that were uncrossed. Imagine if we were to add up all those collective canyons that haven't been crossed. And we've all got different reasons for why we don't show up to the start. But that's step number 1.
Yep. Power of showing up. Right.
Step 2, for us, Grand Canyon, it's pitch black. If you're going to do it, we start at 3 a.m. And so what's so fascinating is when you show up to the edge of the Grand Canyon, it might as well be Nebraska, flat. There's no mountain that you can see in the silhouette against the stars or the moon, because it's all under the horizon line. so we had to, this was the second step, we had to descend into the dark unknown. When you're up on the ridge of the Grand Canyon, there's none of your 5 physical senses that can enable you to see the pathway ahead. Even if you have headlamps on, which we did, we can only see 30 feet, 40 feet, maybe 50 feet in front of us. Mm-hmm. And so what we needed to do is we needed to rely on something outside of ourselves to descend into that dark unknown. And so for us, it was a GPS map, right? That enabled us to see where we were and to see where the path was in relation to us. And so for me, as a pastor, as someone of, of faith, like, man, what a great metaphor for the faith journey. There's this passage in scripture that faith is the assurance of things unseen. And, like the map, the GPS map, because we trusted the map makers, it wasn't like a map that we bought from some kid who just happened to scrawl it on a napkin. Like this was like an official U.S. Geological Services map, GPS on our phones. We trusted the map. So we were willing to descend in the dark unknown. And I realized that in the canyons in my own life, relational, a project, whatever it might be, I often have so much fear taking the first steps or the next steps because I can't see the whole path ahead of me. Mm-hmm. I'm like, well, how are they going to respond? And I don't know how that's going to happen. So in many ways, showing up to the start is like every single step. But when you descend in the dark unknown, it's a willingness to just put one foot in front of the other, to keep moving forward. Even if you make the wrong decision, okay, we can make another decision and get back on track. And that's been super transformational as I've stepped out into the canyons in my own life.
I love that, especially now. I mean, so many people obviously have a feeling of just uncertainty, right? And so much is really unknown. I mean, just in terms of what we've all been through over the, pandemic season. But I love that. I think we all have to get to a point where we have faith in something that allows us to take a step, even if we don't know where that path may go or that path may lead. I mean, that's the ultimate essence of what faith is. You got me sitting here waiting with my notes, though. I'm sitting here going, you said 7. I'm like, I want all 7 steps. Are you willing to share? Like, I don't want to, do you know all 7? Are you willing to share all 7?
I got them. I mean, because I literally, like, since last year, I've put this into practice, and I feel like I personally, like, I need these like tangible things in my life, kind of like I needed this canyon. Like it was a thing that I had on the calendar, and because I had it, it was like this tangible thing that I could accomplish. So now with this steps, we've got the first, second, so the third for us, Grand Canyon, of course, you've got to be willing to get to the bottom of it. You got to get to the bottom. Okay. I mean, there's no bridge over the Grand Canyon. By definition, the canyon, has a bottom. What's interesting is there's all these maps of the Grand Canyon that show the like elevation profile, and all the maps say the safest place to be is at the surface. And they don't recommend you going too deep. Mm-hmm. And the deeper you go, the riskier it is. And I think so often it's so hard for us to cross the canyons, the chasms, whatever they might be, because it's safer at the surface. So let's say, I'm married, and there's a huge fight, let's say, between my wife and I. There's an emotional chasm. And if she brings it up, right? And if I just kind of superficially address it and say, can we just get back to the movie or the show or dinner, whatever it is, it's an unwillingness to get to the bottom of it. And we use that phrase in culture all the time. Like, detectives always want to get to the bottom of it. It's this way to express, like, to get to the bottom of truth, to get to the bottom of, whatever the source or the catalyst. Let's say you're starting a project, a lot of research goes into it. You're stepping out into a new industry. Like, you can't just stay on the surface. Like, it's a willingness to get to the bottom, and whatever chasm is out there. I've loved this idea of like, okay, this is all in.
Especially when it comes today, when you deal with just people, right? Relationships in general, whether it be relationship with your spouse or significant other, or you're talking peer group, or you're talking relationships in business. So often you never get to the root of the issue, right? And you dance around the surface, never being willing to peel back and go deep enough to solve a problem, to address an issue, to make the fix, to, deepen a connection. So I think that applies to just so much of what, where a lot of people are probably at today. So when you say get to the bottom, you mean cut through the stuff. You mean go to the core. You mean get to what the root issue is. Don't be afraid of it. Is that what you mean by go all the way to the bottom?
Exactly. And, there's all the, I don't have it memorized, but there's all these statistics of like how many tens of millions of people have visited the surface of the Grand Canyon.
Yeah.
Since it became like a national park. But then how that number drastically drops a mile deeper, 2 miles deeper, 3 miles deeper. And, the number of people who have made it to the bottom is so much lower than those who stay on the surface. And I think it's so true in life. And I think it's really the people who excel as leaders, as entrepreneurs, as humans, who are people that are willing to get to the bottom of it, who don't settle for just surface things. And think about how much culture can change, in a company, in a school, in a community, in a household, if there's a willingness to get to the bottom.
I love that. Because I'm just thinking right now, like so many times when like I may be coaching an entrepreneur and they get aggravated or frustrated in a scenario, but they refuse to address the real issue. And that without addressing the real issue or the root issue, it manifests itself into frustration or resentment or different things. And it's like, well, how do you ever going to solve really why you're feeling the way you're feeling if you're not willing to go to that person and actually get to the bottom of what you're really upset about or what really is creating that, emotion or reaction to you. And I think a lot of us are guilty of that. A lot of us are guilty of just staying in the surface with conversations. And even when it maybe bugs us or it's stopping us or it's creating a friction that we don't want to, we still are on the surface. And if we just learn to, as you say, kind of go to the bottom and address it, at least we can begin to resolve or solve whatever is the root of a feeling.
And usually it's a fear of being vulnerable. It's a fear of being exposed. It's risky, right? So again, before we went in it, we did our research, and they didn't recommend us going more than 1.5 miles down and back up in a single day. So like that's the official statement from the National Park Service. Like, we do not recommend you doing more than a 3 mile trip, like that's publicly, like that's safe.
Yep.
And so every step we took past 1.5 miles in is now the danger zone. And every step down, more like every stride down, because we were moving downhill, is like 3 or 4 hiking steps back up. So in the back of our mind, as we go deeper and deeper, getting to the bottom, we know like this is risky. And I think the same is true in our life. And it is easier to stay at the surface. And ultimately, we've got to confront that fear. And that's where big breakthroughs happen. And that kind of leads to the fourth step, which is to be willing to go beyond your comfort zone. Of course, we touched on this earlier. For some, you're like, comfort zone, it's beyond my comfort zone to show up. It's beyond my comfort zone to descend to the dark unknown. It's beyond my comfort zone to get to the bottom of it. That can be anywhere in the journey. But I really believe it's impossible to cross a canyon comfortably. It doesn't happen. Like, there's no pack mules that we can jump on. Yes, we can in the Grand Canyon, but we can't do that to reconcile a relationship. There's no seemingly easy paths to, starting a company or to break into a new, frontier. So we've all got to be willing to step beyond our comfort zone.
I love it. And ultimately that's where growth comes from, right? I mean, yes, that we naturally crave familiar, right? And it goes back to what you said earlier. Just we all, I think, have an innate, fear of unknown, or maybe a fear of something we haven't done, or a fear of what other people may think, right? Or a fear of making a mistake. We all we have these. But when we push ourselves outside of our comfort zone, we also realize that's where we stretch. That's where we learn. That's where we grow. That's where we develop skills. That's where we forge character, right? And ultimately that not only gets us further, but we feel better about ourselves, not just for where we got, but because of the journey we took pushing our limits. I think everybody listening to this can relate. And you don't have to get to the bottom of the Grand Canyon to push your comfort zone, right? We can do this in every aspect of our life every single day. So I think you're spot on. I'm loving the steps. What's 5?
All right, 5. Okay, so this is contextually true for us in the Grand Canyon, and then I'll explain it for how I've applied it in the canyons of my life. But for us to do the double crossing, right? It was, of course, 24 miles from one side of the South Rim to the North Rim. And so for us, we had to turn around at the right moment. So that's kind of step 5, turn around at the right moment.
Mm-hmm.
It was tempting to turn around before we got to the other side. I mean, it was tempting not to show up. It was tempting to turn around driving from LA, to the Grand Canyon. There was a moment where I was like, you know what? I've got to get up this North Rim and back down and across and back up. Like, do I turn around? I mean, there was a lot of canyons in our life. There's a temptation to stop early,
mm-hmm.
to turn around, to not complete the work. But also, what's fascinating is that when you get through the North Rim, there's a trail up on the North Rim that keeps going into the northern Arizona wilderness. So you could actually get through the canyon, but keep going and
mm-hmm.
never come back home.
Oh, wow.
And so I think there's like this dualistic miss here where you can either turn around too early and not do the full work, or you could just kind of become entrenched in it and head
Never
off into the wilderness and never come back.
Yeah.
And get lost in it. And I really think, and I'm going to jump from the canyon to vacation for a moment.
Uh-huh.
So go with me here. I found the best vacations are the ones in which I come back home different, a deeper appreciation for a new culture, a reminder like I don't have to run myself ragged. Like I need to incorporate a healthier rhythm to my life. Vacations that seemingly aren't that great are ones in which I come back and like nothing's changed. No more gratitude, no more peace, no more rest, whatever it might be. And so being able to turn around at the right moment, on one hand, is an acknowledgement of the work has been done.
Mm-hmm.
We've reconciled, we've crossed the canyon between us, or we've completed that project. We've submitted that paperwork. We took it public, whatever that might be. But also, and if you could follow me for a moment on this, one of the most loaded words for me as a pastor to ever say, and I know it's going to kind of hit ears and be like, oh, I'm turned off by this word. And I totally get that. The hardest word seemingly to communicate is the word repent. Like mm-hmm. That's got so much negative baggage, right? But the Greek word, so ancient, first century, it's this word that means to change your mind and turn.
Mm-hmm.
And I've come to love that image of when I'm living my life, let's say go in the wrong direction, and I realize it, and I turn, or if I've actually helped create this canyon between me and a loved one, and I'm going to turn from being on my phone when we're having a conversation, and that's caused the canyon, or I'm going to turn away from procrastinating that doesn't enable me to get to the other side of, the canyon of a project, or I'm going to turn away from blaming other people and I'm going to take personal responsibility. It's become this kind of two-sided imagery of, okay, I'm going to turn around because the work's done, but I'm also going to live differently. I'm going to turn an aspect of my character, my skill set, my behavior, so that I can be more likely to cross canyons moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Listening to you share the message. I mean, it's really a journey of self-actualization, self-awareness, all right, personal growth, whatever term you want to use, right? Getting in tune with yourself to know how far can you go? How far do you want to go? At what point do you get what you went there for? And I love your dual analogy of, I saw that going off in the distance. I heard a quote a while back. I forget who I heard it from, was, we're all running, right? Everybody's running. You're either running to something or you're running from something, but we're all running, and sometimes we're running from something like an escapism, right? An avoidance, and sometimes we're running to something, right? Like a passion, like a purpose, like a desire. And when you gave that analogy, that's what popped in my head, because sometimes you just keep running and maybe we're just running away from something when we're unwilling to address, to get to the bottom, like you talked about. And we're using it as an escapism. And there's a fine line between that versus knowing when to make the turn. Like, hey, I got what I came for. I've hit my milestone, right? I've learned what I needed to learn, and now I'm ready to go back a different person. So I love that. I love the way that you're saying it. And I think everybody can relate. And I think all of us have been probably on both sides of those runners. I think all of us, if we're all honest, have been in places where we're running from something and we're doing things to escape or avoid. And we've all been probably in inspired places where we're running to something because it fills us up. And knowing the difference and calling us ourselves out on the differences, I think kind of what I'm getting from the lessons here of knowing when to turn around. I think it's awesome.
Right. Well, yeah, and you can run just because you've been running, and you can fall into the habit of something and forget why you're doing it in the first place. And to go back to the physical canyon, the Grand Canyon, if we kept running into the wilderness, there would be no more canyons to cross, future canyons, right? And so I think there's new projects and new vistas and new opportunities. Even within the context of a single relationship, there can be like multiple canyons, not just a singular canyon. So once you address something, it could be like, all right, what's next?
Yeah.
Let's actually like create something together, whatever it might be. All right. So the sixth one, ready for this?
Yep.
So because we did a double crossing, we had to retrace our steps with new eyes. So literally we turned around at the right moment and we came back through the same path, completely seeing it differently. Not only from a different vantage point, like what was up is now down and what was morning is now afternoon. Like obviously the lighting is different, but it was like at a deeper level. It was like, I remember that moment. That was the moment I wanted to give up. And I feel amazing right now. Like that was the moment when two of my buddies were cussing each other out because they were, getting on each other's nerves. And now they're laughing next to one another. Like it is when you are a canyon crossing type of person, it gives you a new way of seeing all of those steps. It reframes the starting point, the descent into darkness, getting to the bottom of it, the comfort zone. And it gives you a perspective that you never would have had you not shown up and crossed that canyon in the first place. And so I've realized in that experience that when I step out and cross canyons, whether that's at a relational level, whether it's an emotional thing that I've got to work through, it gives me a new vantage point. I see it with new eyes, and I can better identify when I'm in a new situation, like at the end of my rope, want to give up, to see that new moment of fear, that new moment of doubt, that new moment of wanting to turn around too early through the lens of previous canyons that I've already crossed, which is so weird. I mean, like to see this present moment through the lens of a past victory
Mm-hmm.
gives me the courage to, okay, I'm going to keep going. I know what this is like.
I mean, it's perspective shift, right? I mean, would you say you're a different person in that moment because of the experience?
Absolutely. Because perspective changes mindset. Your mindset changes your attitude, your behavior, your action. So it's got this domino effect that sets you on a different trajectory, honestly.
I love it. And it's true. You think about people that you look up to, right? Or people that you consider, have a lot of wisdom. I look at mentors in my life, and the reason they have the wisdom or they have the perspective is they've been through the stuff, right? They've been through the canyons. And it's through the canyons that they gain exactly what you're saying, that vantage point, that different perspective to see things a different way, to approach things a different way. And I think for all of us, the only way that we can become the best versions of ourselves or gain that type of insight is by going through the canyons, by going through the experience, by doing the things that allow us to see things from a different way. So I'm tracking with you. I love it. I'm curious what the last one is.
Well, I'm so thankful to share the last one because I came home, and I came home, the seventh step was, not just coming home, but coming home transformed.
Okay.
And when I got up, it was at night. It was like 7:42 or so. Hours later than we originally planned. We were supposed to get back out of the canyon before sunset. Like I was in a not just physically dark place, like I was in an emotionally dark place. Getting out of that, I came through the dehydration, came through the hallucination, came through all that. And I mean, I don't wish that physical experience on anyone. It was awful. I can't even wrap words around it. And the release of a year's worth of preparation, of fear, of doubt, of concern, mental taxation, physical exhaustion, the release that happens when you get to the top of the South Rim was nowhere close to the emotion that was released when I was able to get through to my wife. And she couldn't stop saying over and over, "I'm so proud of you."
Oh.
And what you don't know, and what those who are listening don't know, is how deeply freeing that was. Because for my entire life, there's been a person whom I love very much and who is very loving to me, and it's my biological father, who's never said, "I'm proud of you." And like, this is something I've carried with me. I've wanted him to say, and he's amazing, right? My parents divorced when I was 6 years old. I don't see him as much as I want, but I've never heard him say, "I'm proud of you." So there's always been this
void,
canyon, hole that I wanted to be filled. And I wanted it to be filled by him saying, "I'm proud of you."
Mm-hmm.
And I've like brought that up to friends. I've shared that with people close to me. I've asked people to, pray for me on that, and what was so this is what happens when you cross canyons. You come home transformed very differently than you think you would.
Mm-hmm.
And so the most powerful moment in the whole experience was when my wife was saying that. For the first time in my life, there was this release. And honestly, I don't need for my dad to say that to me anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like I was finally able to take in that I'm someone who could be proud of,
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't need it to be my biological father to be the one telling me that. For some reason, he needed to be the one who told me that. So then I never believed it in myself. And so I'd always deflect things when other people would say it, like I couldn't let it in. And finally, and I think because I was just physically broken, emotionally broken, mentally broken, right? And it finally came in. And honestly, like, there is this freedom, there's this lightness. Since then, like, conversations with my dad, I'm not like waiting for him to say it. I can just be present with them.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to, unless you've lived my story, like, but just to give a little sneak peek into that aspect of who I am, completely transformed in a way I never would have imagined.
I so appreciate you being that vulnerable and transparent, willing to share what you just shared. I know it takes an incredible amount of strength to share it. And the fact that you're able to share it means what you're saying is absolutely true. Because if it wasn't absolutely true, you probably wouldn't be in a place where you can hop on a podcast with a bunch of random listeners from all over the place and share that transparently. But incredibly moving. Your wife's amazing. And if I'm reading between the lines in what you're saying, I think her words were probably as freeing, not because they were her words that she was proud of you, but probably in that realization you crossing that canyon, you're like, I'm proud of myself. Right. And I appreciate my wife saying that. But at the end of the day, I don't need anybody outside of my own maybe love or pride for what I'm doing. And I think, you know, and it's emotional, you sharing that, but I think everybody listening, like we all go through that, right? We all have, I don't know if it's built in human, whatever, like the need for someone else to validate us and tell us we're good and, you know, give us their approval. Like most of us spend our life craving that. And I think we all got to cross enough canyons, whatever our canyons are, however big they are, until we get to a point where we can be just proud of ourselves and realize that we don't need anybody else to ever tell us that.
Yeah. And I wonder if that was the breakthrough, like, was that I thought I needed my dad to say it so I could believe it in myself. Mm-hmm. And maybe up until that moment, I never believed it myself. Even though others had, you know, my mom, of course, and even my wife before that had said it. But I think for some reason, that was the moment where I believed it for myself. To your point, I didn't need, and you know, God used that, my wife in that moment. That's what I was open to in that moment.
I mean, you're giving me chills. Congratulations. I appreciate you sharing. And I know everybody listening, right, can relate in some way. And I guess my question for you is, do you think that we all got to cross our own canyons in order to get to that same freeing point, right? For those that are out there that maybe are relating to your story, because I know there's a ton, right, that are looking for that. I fall into that vein of, like, you know, the achiever, the one that's constantly going, the one that's always doing, you know, the supposed to. And I know a lot of people in the world kind of follow in suit in their own way. And ultimately, we're all trying to get to the same point where you're describing in that moment where it's like, man, I'm proud of myself, right? I love myself. I don't need anybody else to give me that. My question to you directly is, do you think the canyon is the key? Is crossing our own canyons and pushing ourselves and going through these 7 steps that you eloquently described? Do you think that's the key to getting us to a point where we can have that type of freedom? I'm curious.
I think it's not just crossing a canyon, but it's crossing the right canyons. Because we've all been crossing canyons our whole life. Maybe we don't use that language, but when we feel like, okay, I've just got to earn this much in order to find peace or joy, you know, and you've identified a canyon. And there's a lot of people who the canyon is a status, living in a zip code, having a certain whatever, and they get to that point, and either there's now more canyons to cross, and they realize, oh, I'm just getting started, so I'm not satisfied, I'm not at peace, I don't have the joy, or it's short-lived. And so I think that the hard task is to say and to identify, you know, and maybe even invite trustworthy people into your life to say, like, what canyons have I been crossing? Is that really worth my energy? Is that worth my time? Am I just kind of wasting? Because you could apply those 7 steps to canyons that really aren't worth crossing. But like, what are the meaningful, tangible, grand canyons?
Yeah, I love it.
That are like, treasures and wonders, that you're like, okay, that's what I want to give my life to. That's what I want to give my energy to. That's what I want to throw myself into, and I think that's the key.
I love that. I'm curious because obviously in your role, I would assume, right, pastor, amazing congregation, thriving church. And obviously, my wife's father is also a Presbyterian pastor, right? So I in the family, I see it from kind of that vantage point. And I see so many people go to him with all aspects of life. And I'm sure you get the same. I'm curious right now, and I'm not going to ask for any sort of names or examples. And I know there's privacy and I want to respect all of that. But I'm curious, over the last year and a half, the world has gone through a freaking canyon, right? It's like a Grand Canyon. There is everybody, doesn't matter who you are, where you're from, what part of the world, humanity for the first time in our lifetime, right? We've all been hit with canyons. I'm curious from your vantage point, what are some of the common canyons you've seen as patterns reoccurring, just from the people in your sphere coming to you for guidance that you think are worth crossing, right? I mean, just so, obviously I think everybody listening knows we're not just talking about a hike here, right? I mean, we're talking about a framework or a philosophy that you can apply to so many aspects of life. I'm curious what aspects you're seeing as big common canyons from people coming to you for help that you think are worth putting energy into and are worth crossing.
Yeah, the biggest by far has been at the relational level, whether that's one-on-one or it's at the grandest scale or the largest scale of how a person sees those people, like another group of people. And I've seen thousands of canyons get created in this last year because people who had no idea this particular viewpoint existed a year and a half ago, now in their news feeds, whatever kind of awareness enables us to understand, oh my gosh, I completely disagree with that viewpoint. And there's a whole group of people that believe that crazy viewpoint. And so now there can be this stereotyping of the other that ultimately can distort who they are, character drawings, mm-hmm. My ears they poke out just a little bit, and when I go, I did it as a kid, go to Disneyland, and they drew the thing, they made my ears so big. And I'm like, I don't look like that, do I? And they took this little aspect about me and they blew it out of proportion. And I've seen just in counseling and with friends and people, within our church family, is that there can be huge canyons created because we misunderstand. We assume we can begin to just treat someone like the other, and we circle the wagons, and there's been so much division, and we see it everywhere. And it's larger than just in our city. It's larger than just in our country. This is being played out. It's sadly part of humanity. There's relational fractures, relational canyons that exist. And again and again and again, people are coming saying, how do I see that person differently? How do I forgive that group of people? How do I reconcile with my daughter, mm-hmm. who has this completely different viewpoint? And it seemingly the best canyons, I think, can be crossed are at the human level.
I love that. I'll ask you the inverse of the questions. I'm just genuinely curious because you said the right canyons. So what are some of the canyons you see just from your vantage point and your role, people coming to you for help, that people are putting their energy into, their attention into, their focus into, their time into, their life into, that you're these aren't even canyons worth crossing? I'm the flip side, what are some of the canyons out there that if some of us are getting sucked into and are putting time into, that you might say those aren't worth the time? There's bigger canyons that deserve your energy. What would you think those are?
Yeah. here's some easy ones. So trying to cross the canyon of always being in control. There's a lot of people who spend a lot of energy, a lot of money, making sure everything is controllable, and we order our lives around being able to know what to expect. And so what happens in trying to just pursue that is invariably life happens. This last year happened, right? And I've noticed some people just completely become paralyzed in fear because they've lost control. Mm-hmm. Because they've spent so much of their life trying to cross canyons in order to have control. Another one is crossing the canyon of always being right, and, some people, it's just like, I'm going to be satisfied when not only am I right, but everybody else knows that I'm right. And when people go crossing those canyons, there can be this judgmentalism, pride, right? And, I see that a lot. I guess the inverse, like you said, can also be the inverse of anything that belittles other people. So if you're trying to get to the other side, and the only way to get to the other side is by using people, trampling on people, only bringing people in your life when they can give something to you, and then just kind of brushing them aside when you've got no use for them. That's another good sign that canyon likely isn't going to be one of joy on the other side, or of transformation on the other side. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I know there's people listening going, oh, because again, so many of us slip into that, right? I mean,
it's so easy.
It's so easy. Like, I got so many people really close to me in my life that I watch exert so much energy trying to control the uncontrollable, and again, going back to just the season we've all been in, I think it's what drove a lot of people crazy, just trying to feel some element of control in a time where it's just not there. Like you got to let go. And I know it's easier said than done, but if all of us can make that note, like, that's a canyon not worth crossing, dealing with other people that minimizes, or limits or judges or belittles, that's a canyon it's not worth crossing. Something that you kind of danced on in your own story, and I kind of relate to, and I see this a lot when people that I see in my community and I work with, is the canyon of trying to be who everybody else wants us to be. And especially right now in just like the social media world and the comparison time. And would you say that's a canyon that you see a lot of people put energy into? You're like, that's a canyon that I wouldn't try to cross, just the canyon of trying to be, who everybody else thinks you're supposed to be, or trying to be, everything to everybody, or trying to be, do everything right. I see that a lot in my own world. I've fought with that in my own journey. I'm curious if you would put that in that bucket of, don't put energy there.
Oh yeah. Every single one of those. And I'll add one of my own canyons that I used to always try to cross, and I have to really protect myself from not trying to cross this. It's to please everybody. Mm-hmm. Like, I just want to be liked by everybody. And then super dangerous when you're in a very public role, mm-hmm. where there's a million different opinions. Like, you can't please everybody, whether the everybody is 1,000 people or the everybody is 2 people. It's impossible. So yeah, trying to be all things to all people. I also think that the canyon of, accumulation of things, mm-hmm. or status or a reputation, because often what happens is there's always more things to have. So that's a never ending canyon, or you'll get to one side and you'll be like, oh my gosh, it's a bigger canyon. I didn't know that level existed. You get the top car and you're like, oh, but then there's that car. You get that house and it's like, well, there's then that house or whatever it might be. When it comes to a reputation, like there's always going to be somebody who has a better reputation than you, or there's always going to be a critic. What do you do then with that? I think that there are, just from my own experience, I'm really good at crossing the wrong canyons.
I think all of us are. And the reason I'm asking you to highlight those is because I know all of us are guilty, right, at times in our life or even right now of trying to cross the wrong canyon. So at least just a level of awareness, talking about it here and realizing like, hey, that's not where life and energy should be going. I think everything starts with awareness. Change starts with awareness. I mean, I'll hit you with a hard question. I don't know that there's an answer to this. I'm just curious your response. Like, is there anything you've learned in your own journey, putting time in the wrong canyons, right, to get yourself out of that canyon and focused on something bigger? Like when you're on any one of those things we've talked about, is there anything you've learned or anything you've adopted, a belief, a tool, a reminder, something that has gotten you out of going the wrong direction and going the right direction?
Yeah, so great. Yeah, to me, it always comes down to relationship. And with that, as a person of faith, so that would be relationship with God. And I kind of express that relationship through prayer, but also reading scripture. And there's, a lot of scripture that can be very confusing at first reading. But, when I look at the life of Jesus and I see how he lived, how he loved, how he treated people that rest of society would cast aside, he was very countercultural, very subversive to a life of striving. And it blew people's minds back then. It blows my mind. And so when I come back to that relationship, very quickly, I can see, okay, I fell into the wrong canyon here, but also in relationship with people whom I trust and I've invited into my life to speak into my life, where I can, say to a mentor, to my wife, to close friends, and say like, hey, can you give me some feedback on this? Like, I haven't told you this, but I'm thinking about launching this thing, or I've been, focusing on this thing. Here's my schedule over the last month. Can you give me some feedback? And it's been great to see, like, a mentor of mine who's like, why are you, like, in your role, you shouldn't be taking these meetings. Are you taking these meetings because you're trying to please everybody? And I'm like, oh gosh, yes. I'm trying to I'm trying to just make everybody happy. Okay, you're right. I shouldn't. Okay, so it always comes down to relationship for me.
I love that. So especially relationships that you're willing to be transparent enough to say, hey, help me here, and giving people permission, right? I guess to help you and wake you up when you're going down the wrong path. I think that's awesome. And then obviously an element of faith, which, is you as a person, you as your role, something that is big in my life. I grew up Greek Orthodox. So my mom's half Greek, my dad is, and I grew up in a Greek Orthodox church. I grew up in church, but they spoke Greek and I don't speak Greek. So I grew up in a church. Can't say I learned a lot in the early years. And actually it was, we might even be mutual acquaintances. I think Matt and Tim Rhodes. Do you know the Rhodes brothers or the Rhodes family?
No way.
So Matt Rhodes was like my best friend. We were best friends growing up, right? Lived down the street. And it was actually Matt who started bringing me to church and introduced me to the Christian faith and brought me down to Mexicali on mission trips and kind of opened that door. Was the Rhodes brothers for me. And kind of, I moved into a Christian belief system when I was in high school. Side note, that's where I met my wife. So Karis and I always tell people I picked up my wife down in Mexico, and I like the reactions I get. And I say, now I was at a church mission trip, and they go, but yeah, so they kind of started me on that journey. So I consider myself faith-based, but I've never really considered myself, really religious. And now there's all this language around, like, everybody's kind of moving to this like spiritual language. I'm just curious from you, like, as a pastor and someone, doctor of divinity, like, how do you define religion versus faith versus spiritual? Like, how do you define these words?
Right. It's such a great question. Words, if you could think of it this way, are a lot like a piece of luggage or a backpack. And we put meaning into words, kind of like we load up a backpack. And over time, words can change meaning, like I remember when I was in high school, like when you said, like, man, that's bad. Like, that was good. Right?
So confusing.
But it didn't mean that to my parents, right? Back in the day. So like luggage, you can put different things in. And so I think what's happened over time is that these words of like change meaning. So just from where I am today, and for what it's worth, and if this resonates with listeners, how I see it is that like the negative side of religion, which I frankly want nothing to do with. And when I look at like the life of Jesus in scripture, it seemed like he wanted nothing to do with. It was all about do's and don'ts. This is what you got to do to measure up. And it really separated people. It really made things hierarchical. You're either clean or you're unclean. You're in or you're out. And I think that leads to a very narrow way of living. The opposite of freedom. The positive side of that word. So things that I want to put in that word are, there's like this perseverance. There is I was religious in my training to get to the Grand Canyon in a positive way. Like there was a commitment, a consistency, a long obedience in the same direction, in my training. So there's like a healthy side of that. But I think most people, when they hear religious, it's more of the negative side, the measured up. Faith for me is a lot like that descent into the dark unknown. And I can't rely on my senses, but just because I can't rely on my senses doesn't mean it's not real. So like I couldn't see the Grand Canyon. I couldn't smell the Grand Canyon. I couldn't taste the Grand Canyon. I couldn't, touch my way down the path. And it was still real, but I needed something outside of myself that I could trust in order to make my way down. And so for me, that's been the thing through which the Bible gets to, which is kind of a crazy way of saying this God who wants to be in a relationship with me. So it's a faith in a person, not just in like a set of principles. And then spiritual, I think it's such a mysterious and beautiful word. And I love that I have many friends who say that they're spiritual. And I believe that God made us as spiritual beings that have bodies, not the other way around. I think that we're spiritual beings that have bodies, not physical bodies that can sometimes be spiritual. And it's this acknowledgement of there is this mystery. There's something greater than just the physical. And I can't put my finger on it. I can't fully describe it, but like there's something more. And I feel like God has that hardwired into everybody, regardless of what they believe, regardless of their path, regardless of where they're born. It's this connection with there's got to be something more. And I feel like people should lean into that.
And, to ask an obvious question or a loaded question, but I want to hear the answer. Where do all three of those things fit, or how do they fit when we're crossing the canyon, when we're going through these 7 steps, or whatever our canyon is in our life?
Such a great question. The word integrity, it comes actually from the word integer, which means whole. So this idea of integrity is that there's a wholeness. It's not been fractured or compartmentalized. And I think the opportunity for everyone listening is to find integrity, to find a synthesis, to bring an integration of spirituality, faith, and religion in a way that feels whole. And so for me, that's found itself in a relationship with God through Jesus, so that it's deeply spiritual and mysterious. And there's this massive faith component. And I hope that the religious side of it, so the activity isn't judgmental, isn't a list of do's and don'ts, but it's kind of out of the overflow of this relationship that, like, I want to practice gratitude, you know, I want to practice forgiveness, you know, I want to practice reconciliation. I want to practice being a peacemaker. You know, I want to practice being a voice for the voiceless. Like, when you practice things, you're religious about it. Like, those are healthy things I think most people would agree on. And it prevents you from going down the nasty side of religion, which just separates, you know, and condemns.
I love it. And I love the way you frame that. It might seem like a silly question, but even me, I just honestly wanted the answer, because I hear these words used in so many different contexts in so many different ways. And, you know, sometimes it's just, I don't even know where people are coming from. So I love the way you kind of define those, and I align with all of it. And I know everybody listening, I want to be mindful of everybody's belief systems, right? When it comes to your own journey of faith, or, you know, whatever religious belief system you have. And I know ultimately there'll be people that listen to this that have a variety of different belief systems, and I want to support your choice and your prerogative. But I think it doesn't matter what your belief system is. Every single person on this planet can take value from the conversation we just had and what you just gave, right? I mean, every one of us can relate on a human level to needing to cross canyons in our life, not just cross canyons, but now being aware of the right canyons to cross. A framework you gave us that all of us can relate to, having gone through probably at certain periods of our life. But I love the way you organize that in just a simple, relatable way to give us steps to follow as we choose the right canyons to put our energy into. And to do that with an energy of faith, right? To take the step, right? And be able to get outside the comfort zone. And an energy of spirituality, right? That is within all of us. So, you know, I appreciate the time. I want to be mindful, because I know I've kept you for a while, and I know there's other people that want your time. But before I go into some closing thoughts and allow you to share what's ever on your mind, can I hit you with just 3 questions that I ask everybody? Just
yes, I'm
first response, quick answers. Can I do that for you? You got a couple minutes?
Yeah.
Okay.
Lightning round.
Yep. Lightning round, 3 questions. First thing that comes to your mind, right? So, I'm all about shifting perspective. We talked a lot about, even in one of your lessons today, how you go out and you come back with a different perspective. And I call it shifting the script, which just means changing the story or the narrative, right, in our own mind. I'm curious, what belief shift in your life do you think was most significant into creating who you were today? You went from telling yourself this to telling yourself this.
It's so amazing how quickly I can get to this. I am what I do. That was the old me. Mm-hmm. So I'm like a blank canvas, and I've got to create a masterpiece. I gotta hustle. I gotta do it. I gotta measure up. And there was this fear. There was this doubt. There was this insecurity of like, well, what if it's not enough? And the shift was, there's a masterpiece here. Mm-hmm. I've just gotta let it out. And I love how Michelangelo described, I think it was Michelangelo, mm-hmm. and the David and the granite, like he saw David in it and he just wanted to set him free. So it's this shift of like, okay, no, it's already there. We got to uncover it.
I love that. That's like down to the identity level, right? Instead of trying to identify with what we do, like we already are who we are. I love it. I love that shift. Yeah. So the second one, you'll love this one. So let's say you were the creator for the day. Like you were God, you were the universe. You had like the power right now on a snap of a finger to shift some script or some belief on every single person's mind on planet Earth right now. Like just like that, you could immediately help everybody create a shift. What shift would you give them?
From consumers to creators.
Explain.
We've gotten so good at just taking in. We take in movies, we take in food, we take in products, we take in clothes. And in some ways, we've become like a reservoir. We collect. And it seems like less and less so we output. Mm-hmm. We're no longer rivers of life and creativity. And, we're reservoirs. We're no longer thoroughfares. We're cul-de-sacs. And so, I mean, even the way, in media, people are described as, consumer habits are, like our identity has become, we're just consumers. So the shift would be, we would create more words, things, ideas, relationships.
I love it. You're speaking my language. We're all creators out there. What are you creating right now? What are you doing? What ideas are you bringing to the world, right? Everybody has that in them. I love it. So shift for consumerism to creators. Okay, last one. Obviously, I kind of called the podcast Alive by Design. I'm always been just enthralled with the word alive and what it means just to like truly, not just be alive, but like feel alive. I'm curious, like you, Drew Sams, right? What makes you feel most alive?
It's that moment being outside on the trail during the blue hour. Are you familiar with the blue hour? So many people are familiar with the golden hour.
Yeah.
Right? It's that hour before sunset. Well, the blue hour happens twice a day. It's the time earlier than the first twilight. It's the hour after the golden hour. And it's a perspective shift. Yeah. It's not the like golden hour. Yeah. It's happy hour. That's when you do photography. It's like this liminal space, this threshold experience of what was and what will be. And there's just something about being out on the trail, probably because I spent all this time training, right? And that's the one time I could fit it in with the kids waking up early and, the work in the day. It was this like moment of potential that I chose to step into. And I felt so alive in it. And the birds, you could hear the sound under my feet. I want to live my life the way that moment felt all day long.
I love it. I love the way you just ended it. I want to live my life the way that moment felt. Because that's the ultimate goal, right? The ultimate goal is to figure out what makes us feel alive and to feel that way as much as possible. I think, otherwise, what's the point?
Right.
I love it. This conversation has been so inspiring. I mean, we can go all day long. I've gotten a tremendous amount of value. And I know everybody who takes the time to listen to this is going to grab nuggets that they can instantly apply to whatever canyons that are right in front of us today and will be in front of us tomorrow. Before I ask for your closing thoughts and anything you want to kind of leave us with, I know there's going to be a bunch of people that are like, where can I find, more about Drew? You guys, he's easy to find online. So Instagram, Pastor Drew Sams. So just at Pastor Drew Sams, go follow. If you got something from today's conversation, we only do this as a way to give value. There's no other motive. We want to contribute. If you heard something that resonated, something that inspired, something that gave you a shift, like, shoot us a message. Let Drew know. That's why we put time into this, is to make a difference and make an impact. And when you're on his Instagram, I recommend click the link tree. There's a link there and you can find a bunch of different amazing resources. If you want to catch up on some of Drew's sermons, and obviously you can catch him live most Sundays here in Los Angeles at Bel Air Presbyterian Church, which is amazing. And I'm just going to go on a limb. Drew, I looked for the book, man, and I couldn't find one. After today's conversation, like these 7 steps, like I'm just going to say, like that when's the book coming? I don't know. This would be a perfect one.
Well, here's the crazy thing. So I had to do this. I had to show up to the start. So I've got a meeting set up, which will probably line up right when this goes live, to figure out what are the steps to execute. Because I've got the outline, I've got it ready to go. Now I just got to show up and do it.
I love it. That's amazing. I'm listening to all of this, and I know you kind of mentioned that on your Instagram post a couple of weeks ago. And I'm like, this has got to get out to the world because, again, it's something that everybody can relate to, and it's an amazing experience for you to share. And I love that you just applied your own framework to your own next step. I'm showing up, step 1. Well, Drew, anything before we round out? I appreciate everything you've given us. Anything on your mind? Anything on your heart? Anything you want to leave us with before we kind of close out the conversation?
Yeah, super simple. So John Muir famously has this quote: "The mountains are calling and I must go." And to paraphrase that, the canyons are calling and we must go. What would our world look like a year from now, a decade from now, if more and more people cross the right canyons? Reconciliation, new ideas turn into reality. The canyons are calling. So we must go.
I love it. Thank you so much for the time. I've gotten so much out of this and I appreciate all of it. I'm going to do my own checkup to make sure I'm crossing the right canyons. And I took notes and I got my 7 steps. I look forward to applying all of them. So thank you so much for the time today. I appreciate it.
Such a joy to be with you. Love what you're doing. Love what you're putting into the world. Can't wait for what's next.
I love it. Dr. Drew Sams, everybody. Hey guys, one last thing. I'm super excited that this new podcast, Alive by Design, just went live. You see, I designed the show to bring you inspired thoughts and fascinating conversations with the world's most impactful people, to provide transformative principles and practices to help you wake up, move toward your meant to, and feel fully alive. And I'd love for you to help me spread the word now. Simply subscribe, rate, and review the podcast on this platform right now. So if I've ever given you value, please do me this personal favor and go subscribe now. And if you found today's episode helpful in any way, make sure you share this with at least one friend today. You have the power right now to change someone's day. So send them a text message with a link to alivebydesign.com, or simply copy and paste the link right from this podcast platform. Who's one person you know right now that you want to see succeed, that you want to see grow, that you want to see feel more alive? Shoot them a text with your largest takeaway from today and be a light in their day. And if you were referred here by a friend, make sure you shoot them a text back and say thank you. I'd love to hear from you directly on what you got from today's podcast. So if you're up for it, drop by my Instagram @BlakeMallon and shoot me a DM. And as always, thank you for showing up. I'm grateful for you, and I hope our time together today in some small way helped you feel a little more alive. Until next time.